There are places on this planet where the air itself feels like a verdict, where the cold becomes a presence that watches you, follows you, and slowly measures your endurance. The Arctic Sea is one of those places. It stretches out in a flattened, pale horizon that barely separates sky from water, a world built from nothing but wind, ice, and the slow pulse of distant engines. Into this frozen silence, the convoys bound for Murmansk began their journey. They carried not only cargo but fear, hope, and the quiet understanding that survival was never guaranteed. Before you drift off, consider subscribing only if quiet stories from frozen seas are your kind of thing, and feel free to share what lingers with you the most. Is it the storm, the silence, or the sailors who refuse to bend to the cold? You're listening to Echoes of War. You see their ships as small silhouettes against the endless grey. Some are merchant steamers loaded to the rails with weapons, trucks, food, and fuel. Others are escort vessels with sharper lines, built for speed and defense. Together, they advance in tight formation, each hull trembling under the weight of the cold. Every surface is rimed with ice. Every railing has thickened into a frozen shape that no longer resembles metal. Even the flags hang stiff and brittle, clinging to their masts as if stunned by the temperature. The men moving along these decks walk with that slow, careful rhythm that extreme cold forces on the body. Their breath shifts into the wind and disappears instantly. They keep their hands tucked deep inside wool, leather, and whatever layers they can manage to stack against their skin. Some of them try to joke about the frost, but most remain quiet. The silence is not just the silence of concentration. It is the silence of knowing that these waters are among the most dangerous in the world. There are no warm currents here, no friendly harbors nearby, no quick rescue if something goes wrong. Here, every mile has a price. As you watch them, a single realization settles over you. These convoys were not just supply missions. They were lifelines drawn across a hostile ocean. Every crate, every barrel, every vehicle strapped to the decks was a promise being delivered at unimaginable cost. Without them, cities would starve, armies would falter, and the entire shape of the war might shift in ways no one could predict. But none of that is visible in the moment. All you see are men working quietly in an icy dusk that feels like midnight. The wind rises, sharpening into a blade that cuts across exposed skin. It whistles through the rigging, making ropes hum like frozen strings. The sea beneath them is not smooth, but it moves in long, heavy swells that look slow until they lift the entire ship with surprising force. The water is darker than night. It reflects nothing. It reveals nothing. It simply waits. The sailors know this sea well enough to respect it, and perhaps fear it, but they do not have the luxury of turning away. They have their orders. They have their mission, and so they keep moving. Far ahead, ice fog begins to form, curling around the bows like pale smoke. The convoy enters it without hesitation, swallowed by a cloud that glows faintly in the dim Arctic daylight. The air becomes colder still, as if each breath now carries tiny shards of glass. The sailors brace themselves. They know that once they pass this threshold, everything becomes harder, slower, and more dangerous. Yet they continue forward, each ship following the next with unwavering discipline, like beads on a string pulled steadily across a dark and frozen world. The journey begins long before the ships reach the open sea. It starts in a harbor still wrapped in the dark calm of early morning, with lamps glowing faintly against the cold and men moving slowly across the decks as if trying not to disturb the air. You watch the preparations unfold with a quiet sense of inevitability. There is no rush, but there is no hesitation either. Every movement is deliberate, practiced, and shaped by the knowledge that once the ships depart, they will enter one of the most unforgiving routes in the war. The docks are slick with frost, the ropes stiff and difficult to coil, and the wooden planks echo with each footstep. Steam rises from the funnels of the escort vessels, drifting upward in twisting shapes before fading into the pale sky. Some sailors stand near the gangways, smoking the last cigarettes they will allow themselves before the cold forces them to stop. Others adjust scarves and collars, trying to protect any exposed skin. They know what awaits them, and although no one says it out loud, there is a shared understanding that some may not return. As the engines warm, the hulls begin to vibrate gently. It is a subtle tremor, but it signals the beginning of the long passage ahead. The merchant ships, heavy with supplies bound for the Soviet ports, sit low in the water. Their decks are stacked with crates and equipment, lashed tightly to prevent anything from shifting when the seas turn rough. Beneath the decks, the cargo holds are filled with fuel, ammunition, food, and machinery. Everything that makes a war run is packed into those metal caverns, and the responsibility of carrying it rests on the shoulders of men who have learned not to think too far ahead. The officers walk the length of their ships, inspecting, checking, adjusting. They look for ice already forming in corners where water has frozen overnight. They check the lifeboats, the ropes, the emergency gear. The smallest failure can become fatal in Arctic waters. Even the tools used to chip ice from the railings are laid out neatly, ready for immediate use. Nothing is left to chance. When the order finally comes to cast off, it arrives with the quiet authority of routine. Lines are released from their moorings, the engines deepen their tone, and the ships begin to move. You watch the harbor slowly drift away, the lights shrinking until they become faint specks behind the convoy. The shoreline loses its shape, blurred by the morning mist. Soon, the ships are surrounded by nothing but open water and the faint glow of a sun that never rises far above the horizon. The temperature drops steadily as they head north. The air becomes sharper, and every breath feels like drawing cold metal into the lungs. The men adjust again, tightening gloves and pulling hoods lower. Some gather near the vents that release warm air from below deck, holding their hands above the rising heat for a moment of relief. The warmth does not last long. The cold always returns. As the convoy pushes into the wider sea, the first signs of the Arctic's influence appear. Frost begins to creep across the deck in delicate patterns that look almost beautiful if you forget how dangerous they will become. The ropes stiffen, the lifeboats develop a thin crust of ice, and the railings grow white with frost. The sailors chip away at it constantly, knowing that if they do not work ahead of the ice, it will soon grow heavy enough to threaten the ship's balance. The sky darkens as the hours pass. Even during the day, the light is weak and fleeting. A pale band of blue hovers along the horizon, and above it spreads a dome of muted gray. This is the Arctic Gate, the threshold into a realm that feels untouched by the rest of the world. It has no softness, no warmth, no comfort. It offers only wind, water, and cold. Yet this is the path they must travel. The escort ships take their positions at the edges of the formation. Destroyers move like lean shadows, their hulls slicing through the waves with purpose. Corvettes patrol the flanks, scanning for dangers both above and below the surface. Every officer on every ship understands that once they pass into the northern waters, the threats multiply. Submarines wait beneath the waves, aircraft lurk beyond the cloud line, and storms can rise without warning. But for now, the sea remains calm, as if allowing the convoy a moment of deceptive peace before the hardships to come. You watch the men settle into their routines. Some stand watch on the bridge, eyes fixed on the horizon. Others move through the narrow corridors deep within the ship, checking machinery and monitoring gauges. In the galleys, cooks prepare hot drinks and simple meals that help fight the cold. In the quarters below decks, sailors secure their gear and remove layers of wet clothing trying to find a little comfort in a place where comfort is always temporary. The first full day at sea passes in a rhythm of work and watchfulness. The convoy moves steadily forward, each ship maintaining its place with unwavering precision. The air grows colder with every mile, and the wind begins to pick up. You can sense that the Arctic is preparing to show its true nature. The sailors can sense it as well. They know the calm never lasts. As night falls, the darkness thickens quickly. There is no moon to soften it. The only light comes from the dim lamps on the ships and the glow of the horizon behind them. The ocean becomes a shifting black expanse, moving with the slow, heavy motions of deep water. The ships continue on, guided by instruments and experience, and a sense of duty that holds them to their path. The Arctic Gate is behind them now. Ahead lies the long stretch of frozen sea, where storms rise without warning and ice forms without mercy. Yet the convoy moves forward, silent and determined, carrying with it the weight of a world at war and the fragile hope that their journey will reach its end. The night stretches over the convoy like a heavy blanket, pressing down with a stillness that feels almost unnatural. Out here, the darkness is not a temporary visitor. It is a constant companion. It settles on the ships, on the water, and on the faces of the men who stand watch. You sense that in this darkness, the sailors lose all sense of distance. They can no longer see far enough to measure the world around them. They must trust that the ship ahead is still there, that the sea beneath them holds no hidden ice, and that the sky above remains empty of danger. This trust becomes a quiet act of courage. Inside the ships, the low hum of machinery becomes the heartbeat of the journey. The engines thrum steadily, vibrating through metal floors and narrow corridors. The sailors know every note of this sound. They can tell when the ship is working smoothly and when something is not quite right. They learn to sleep with a constant vibration under their bodies, their breaths falling into rhythm with the machinery that carries them forward. In the mess halls, men gather for brief moments of warmth. The light here is dim, kept low to avoid detection, but it is enough to create a small refuge from the cold outside. The smell of strong tea is always present, and sometimes there is soup thick enough to warm the throat. The sailors eat quickly, not out of impatience, but because the cold seeps into them even here, as if the walls cannot hold it back. Hands shake slightly as spoons are lifted, and boots remain stiff with frost even after hours below deck. The conversations are quiet. No one raises their voice. There is an understanding among them that excessive noise feels out of place in this frozen world. Instead, they talk in low tones about home, about letters that might be waiting for them, about the last convoy that returned battered but alive. Some speak of ships that never came back. These stories are shared with a steady, resigned tone of men who have learned not to expect fairness from the sea. You watch their faces as they listen. Some men nod slowly, others stare into their cups, and a few attempt a faint smile when someone describes something humorous or absurd from a past voyage. But even laughter is restrained. It is shaped by the cold. It is shaped by caution. The men know that out here, joy must be handled gently. On deck, the cold sharpens further as the convoy pushes deeper north. The metal rails crackle softly when touched, the frost reacting to the warmth of a hand. Sailors move with the careful steps of men who know how easy it is to slip on ice that has grown invisibly across the surface. They chip the railings every hour, sometimes more. The ice reforms immediately, returning in thin layers that thicken slowly throughout the night. Eventually, no matter how diligent they are, the sea will begin to weigh their ships with ice, and the battle to remove it will become urgent. The ocean changes as well. The swells become longer, heavier. The water grows darker, almost ink-like, reflecting nothing except the faint glow of the ship's shielded lights. Occasionally, a wave rises higher than expected, slapping against the side of a ship with a dull, resonant sound that echoes along the hull. The sailors barely react. They have heard worse. In the radio rooms, operators sit with headphones pressed tightly against their ears. The static of the Arctic is thick, and signals distort easily. They listen for any transmissions from escort ships, for weather reports, for warnings about submarines or changing ice patterns. Every message is logged. Every silence is noted. The operators know that the Arctic can swallow radio waves as easily as it swallows sound. Below, in the engine rooms, the heat is intense. The contrast between this cramped, roaring space and the freezing deck above is extreme enough to overwhelm the senses. The crew here works stripped to their undershirts, sweat running down their backs, eyes narrowed against the glare of lamps reflecting off metal. They shovel fuel, monitor pressure gauges, and listen for changes in the rhythm of the engine. Many of them will never feel the full force of the Arctic wind, yet they face dangers of their own. The machinery they maintain is the reason the ships stay alive. A moment's lapse can have consequences far harsher than the cold. When the sailors return to their bunks, they often lie fully clothed. Removing layers is a luxury reserved for warmer waters. Blankets are wrapped tight around them, boots tucked beside the bed for immediate use. Sleep comes in short bursts, interrupted by shifts, alarms, or the constant need to return to the deck to chip ice. Their bodies adapt to this fractured rhythm, learning to fall asleep quickly and wake just as fast. The cold, the tension, and the demands of the voyage shape their rest into something that resembles survival more than comfort. As the hours pass, the convoy reaches a region where the air grows even colder. The horizon behind them is nearly gone, swallowed by the Arctic darkness. Ahead, faint lights flicker on the bows of the nearest ships, glowing like isolated lanterns in a vast, empty world. You feel the loneliness of this place settle over everything. It is a loneliness born from distance, silence, and the knowledge that if a ship falls out of formation, help may never come in time. Yet there is a strange beauty here as well. The wind carries thin crystals of ice that shimmer when they catch the faintest light. The water beneath the ships rolls in slow, heavy patterns that look almost ceremonial. The sky, though dark, holds hints of silver where the clouds shift and reveal a glow too diffused to trace. The sailors see these things too, though they rarely comment on them. They understand that beauty in the Arctic is inseparable from danger. Near midnight, the temperature drops sharply again. Ice fog forms across the sea, spreading in a low, pale band that hovers above the surface. It thickens quickly, swallowing the bows of the lead ships until the convoy seems to be sailing into a cloud. Visibility shrinks to almost nothing. Voices carry strangely in this fog, stretching out and fading before they reach their destination. Lights become soft halos. Instruments grow harder to read. This is the true threshold of the Arctic passage. The officers order the ships to tighten formation. Engines slow slightly to prevent collisions. The crew becomes even more alert, every man aware that a sudden change in direction, a drifting piece of ice, or a miscalculated distance can endanger the entire convoy. The escort vessels move like shadows, their outlines barely visible through the fog. They guard against threats that cannot be seen but must always be imagined. In this moment, as the convoy moves deeper into the shrouded world ahead, you sense a shift. The sailors feel it too. The Arctic is no longer a distant challenge waiting for them. It has arrived. It surrounds them. It shapes every breath, every step, every decision. And still the ships move forward. They follow a path carved not by certainty, but by necessity. They carry cargo that must reach its destination. They carry the hopes of people far beyond these waters. They carry the quiet determination that has always defined those who sail into places where most would never dare to go. The Arctic gate is behind them now. They have crossed into the frozen world where the real test begins. The first thing that defines this part of the Arctic is the darkness. It is not like the night you know from other places. This darkness has weight. It feels layered and endless, stretching out in every direction until the world becomes a single, silent color. Even the sea seems darker here, as if it absorbs what little light remains instead of reflecting it. You realize quickly that the men sailing these convoys do not simply travel through the night. They live inside it. The convoy moves forward as if swallowed by a massive shadow. The faint glow of the ship's shielded lamps does little to push back the blackness. Instead, the light clings to the ships themselves, tracing their outlines in thin halos that flicker and fade with every wave. Beyond that narrow glow lies a world that feels both empty and watchful. Every sailor knows that unseen dangers hide within it. On the bridge of the lead escort vessel, the officers stand close to the windows, staring into the void ahead. Their eyes strain to catch the smallest shapes, the faintest movement. They are looking for ice, for changes in the water's surface, for the silhouette of a submarine's conning tower. They know that the enemy uses this darkness as a shield. They also know that a mistake made here, in this environment, leaves no room for recovery. You watch them work without speaking. The bridge is hushed. There is no idle conversation, no unnecessary sound. The men communicate through short phrases, gestures, and the subtle movements of bodies accustomed to the rhythm of the sea. The faint hum of the instruments is the only constant. Even the engine noise seems muted, pushed down by the weight of the night. Below deck, the darkness invades in a different way. The narrow passageways are lit by dim red lamps designed to preserve night vision. Shadows cling to every corner. The sailors move through these corridors for their duties, brushing past pipes and bulkheads that radiate cold. Their footsteps echo softly, swallowed almost immediately by the metal. Everything feels closer here, as if the ship itself is tightening around them. Some of the men try to rest during their off hours. They lie in their bunks and stare into the faint glow that seeps in from the corridor. The darkness beyond their curtains feels pressing, like a thick fabric that wraps around the mind. Sleep comes slowly, and it is shallow when it arrives. Many wake at the slightest sound, unsure if the echo they heard came from within the ship or from the sea outside. It takes time to remember where they are. For those on deck, the night is colder still. The wind is relentless, carrying flecks of ice that sting the skin. The sea mist freezes instantly on exposed surfaces, creating tiny spikes that catch the light when someone moves past. The men chip away at them constantly. The ice forms faster now, growing into ridges that creep across railings and decks. The sailors fight it with steady movements, knowing that if they fall behind, the build-up can become dangerous. The loneliness of this place settles deeply into the spirit. You can see it in the faces of the men standing at their watch posts, their eyes fixed on the darkness. They are not afraid, but they are alert in a way that looks exhausting. Their bodies are stiff from the cold, their breaths short and controlled. They lean slightly into the wind, as if bracing themselves against a force they cannot see. Yet there is an unspoken solidarity among them. They know that everyone on these ships is experiencing the same cold, the same fear, the same weight of the night. This shared hardship ties them together more tightly than any speech or order could. They move as a single unit, understanding each other through small actions rather than words. On some nights, the darkness deepens even further when clouds form overhead, blocking the faint glow of distant stars. During these moments, the convoy becomes a string of barely visible shapes drifting across the sea. The officers rely entirely on instruments to keep formation. The sailors move by memory, by touch, and by instinct. Even the smallest flicker of light becomes important. In rare moments, the sky shifts unexpectedly. When the clouds part just enough, a thin curtain of pale light appears far to the north. It is not bright, but it is unmistakable. The beginning of the aurora stretches across the horizon, like a silent ribbon unfurling in slow motion. The sailors look up when they can, their faces softening slightly. Even here, in this hostile world, the sky offers small reminders of beauty. These moments do not last long. The clouds return quickly, but the memory of the light lingers. Inside the radio room, the operators strain to hear signals through heavy static. Arctic interference makes every message sound distant and broken. The operators adjust dials, repeat transmissions, and check for coded warnings. They know that danger can come without warning, but they also know that information can grant the convoy a small advantage in surviving what lies ahead. They remain focused, even as exhaustion creeps into their bodies. The men in the engine rooms feel the darkness differently. Down here, there is no night or day. The bright lamps create an illusion of warmth, but the metal walls radiate cold no matter how hot the machinery becomes. The noise is overwhelming, pushing into their ears and chests. They sweat constantly in the heat, only to freeze when they go topside. Their sense of time dissolves. All they know is the heartbeat of the engine and the relentless pressure of responsibility. When sailors gather briefly between shifts, their conversations often return to the nature of the darkness. They speak about how it changes their perception of distance, how it alters their sense of direction, how it plays tricks on the mind. Some men say they see shapes where there are none. Others describe hearing things that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. These stories are shared quietly, not as confessions of fear, but as acknowledgments of the environment they must endure. On deck, the officers check their compasses and maps repeatedly. Navigation becomes a test of precision. The Arctic night hides everything except the faint glow of instruments. A shift of even a few degrees can push a ship off course, leading it into ice fields or dangerous waters. Every adjustment is made with care. Every decision is weighed against the consequences of error. You feel the effect of the night as well. The vastness of the darkness creates a sense of slow-motion time. Minutes stretch. Hours blend together. The ocean below becomes a continuous, rolling motion that seems to erase the sense of forward progress. And yet, the convoy continues to move, mile by mile, deeper into the frozen world that isolates them from everything they know. Eventually, a faint glow rises along the edge of the horizon. It is not sunrise in the traditional sense, but a softening of the darkness. The sky shifts from pure black to a muted shade of gray. The sailors look toward it instinctively. The change is small, but it signals the transition into another Arctic day, a day that will look almost identical to the night that came before. The convoy prepares to face this dim light with the same steady determination that carried them through the darkness. They know that the challenges will not fade with the change in the sky. The Arctic holds both night and day in its grip, and neither offers safety. But they continue onward, bound by duty, courage, and the quiet resilience that defines the men who sail these frozen seas. As the dim Arctic day settles into its muted gray, the convoy begins another cycle of work beneath a sky that never truly brightens. The light is thin and distant, a suggestion rather than a comfort. It lays softly over the vessels, revealing the ice that has grown during the night. Railings have thickened, ladders are edged with white, and antenna wires wear delicate, dangerous coats of frost. The men step out onto the decks with a familiar sense of resignation. They know what must be done before the cold can claim too much. You watch as teams move along the ships, armed with hammers, axes, and wooden mallets. They strike at the ice in steady rhythms, chips flying away into the wind. Every blow is necessary. Left unchecked, the weight of the ice would alter the balance of the ship, pulling it down by the bow or stern, making it more vulnerable to waves or sudden maneuvers. The men chip and scrape, their bodies bending and straightening in a pattern that has become second nature. Their hands ache. Their faces burn with cold. But the work continues. The sound of tools striking metal carries across the water, merging with the hum of engines and the hiss of wind. It becomes a kind of harsh music that defines life in the Arctic. The men barely notice it anymore. It is simply part of the background, like the creaking of the hull or the distant calls of officers. What they do notice is the way their breath crystallizes in front of them, the way their fingers stiffen even inside gloves, and the way their clothes grow heavy as frost gathers on every surface. From your vantage point, the convoy looks like a chain of stubborn shapes pushing through a world that does not want them. The water around them rolls in slow, powerful motions, edged with slush and small pieces of drifting ice. The sky above remains low, almost pressing down on the masts and funnels. The line between sea and air feels blurred, as if the ships are moving through one continuous, frozen substance. Inside the ships, the men follow routines designed to keep their minds as steady as their hands. Watches are rotated with precision. Meals are served at set times, even when appetites are dulled by cold and fatigue. Clothing is checked for dampness, boots are dried when possible, and gear is carefully stored so that nothing is misplaced when urgently needed. These small acts of order help counter the chaos that could easily take hold in such a place. Yet no matter how carefully the routines are maintained, the weight of the endless night presses on them. Some men grow quieter than usual. Their thoughts turn inward. They replay memories of home, of warmer places, of streets and rooms filled with familiar sounds. Others talk more than they normally would, as if words could build a bridge out of the darkness surrounding them. They speak of food they miss, of music they have not heard in months, of faces they hope are still waiting for them. In certain spaces on board, handwritten notes and photographs are pinned to walls. Small paper anchors in a sea of metal. These reminders of another life remain in place no matter how the ship rolls, no matter how hard the wind screams outside. They are fragile objects, but they hold an immense weight in the minds of the men who look at them between shifts. As the convoy pushes deeper into the Arctic, the threats that live in the darkness begin to feel more present. Reports filter through from other routes, other convoys. Stories of ships struck suddenly in the night, of flames rising from the water, of men forced into lifeboats in seas so cold that survival is measured in minutes rather than hours. The sailors aboard these ships already know these stories, but hearing them again, in this environment, gives them a sharper edge. On the escort vessels, anti-submarine watches become even more intense. Sonar operators lean over their equipment, listening for the faint echoes that might reveal a submarine lurking below. They know that the enemy uses the same darkness as cover, moving silently through the deep, waiting for a chance to strike. Every unusual sound in the headphones sends a ripple of tension through the room. Every confirmed absence of contact brings only brief relief. The ocean is vast. Silence does not always mean safety. Above, when the weather allows, lookouts scan the sky for aircraft. The risk of enemy planes increases as the convoy nears certain zones. Even though the Arctic clouds often form a thick barrier overhead, there are gaps. There are windows of visibility through which danger can descend. The men watch those openings carefully, their eyes narrowed against the biting wind. They know that in this environment, an attack can be sudden and overwhelming. Despite these dangers, The work on board continues with a quiet steadiness that borders on stubbornness. The gunners test their weapons, clearing frost from barrels and mechanisms. The navigators plot their course, adjusting for currents and ice. The radio men listen for updates from higher command, aware that changes in orders can come at any time. The cooks prepare what they can with supplies that must last the entire journey. Each role is a small piece of a larger effort to keep the convoy moving. At times, the darkness offers moments that feel almost unreal. On certain nights, when the clouds part and the air is particularly clear, the aurora returns. This time it is stronger, stretching in curtains of light that ripple across the sky. Greens and faint purples shimmer above the ships, turning the ice-covered decks and frozen railings into surfaces that reflect a ghostly glow. The sailors look up, some leaning on their tools, others pausing at their watch posts. For a brief moment, the Arctic does not feel hostile. It feels ancient and indifferent, a vast stage on which their journey is only a small, temporary movement. The men do not speak much during these displays. Words feel unnecessary. The light itself becomes a kind of silent company, reminding them that the world is larger and older than any war. When the aurora fades, they return to their tasks with slightly steadier hearts. The cold remains. The danger remains. But they have seen something that carries them forward. There are nights when the sea turns rough with little warning. Waves rise higher, slamming against the hulls with a force that sends shudders through every deck. The ships lean into the swells, climbing and falling with heavy motions that test every bolt and seam. On these nights, walking becomes difficult. Men grip handrails tightly, their bodies swinging with the movement of the ship. Any misstep can send someone sliding across the deck toward the railings, where the cold, open water waits just beyond. In this violent motion, ice becomes even more treacherous. It forms unevenly, creating slick patches that catch boots at the worst possible moment. The sailors adapt by moving in a low, deliberate way, bending their knees, shifting their weight with each roll of the ship. Their world contracts to a series of careful steps, thoughtful grips, and constant awareness of the angle beneath their feet. During storms, sound becomes overwhelming. The wind roars, the waves crash, and the ship groans as it strains against forces that would tear a weaker structure apart. Inside, objects rattle and clatter. Doors slam. Loose items slide along floors. The men raise their voices only enough to be heard over the noise. Orders must be clear. Confusion is dangerous in such conditions. Eventually, the storm passes, as all storms do. The sea calms slowly, the waves returning to their long, heavy roll. The wind subsides into a steady, icy flow. The sailors emerge from the intensity of the night with red eyes and sore muscles. They repair what has been damaged, resecure cargo, and clear new layers of ice. The darkness remains unchanged above them, but they know they have endured something that not everyone can survive. You see how the endless night of the Arctic reshapes these men. It does not break them quickly. Instead, it wears at them in small ways, hour by hour, watch by watch. It tightens their shoulders, narrows their gazes, and makes their movements more economical. Yet it also brings out a kind of quiet loyalty. They depend on each other completely. Every man on board understands that their survival is linked to the efforts of everyone else. In rare, brief pauses, there are softer moments. A mug of tea shared without words. A small joke passed along a line of men clearing ice. A hand placed on a shoulder in silent encouragement as someone returns from a long, bitter watch. These gestures do not erase the hardship, but they offer a thread of human warmth that the Arctic cannot freeze. The night stretches on. The convoy continues forward, guided by instruments and determination more than by light. Somewhere ahead lies the next phase of the journey, where the darkness will no longer be the only threat. Enemy forces wait along the way, watching for convoys like this one. The sailors know this. They can feel the tension rising with every mile. For now, though, they remain wrapped in the long Arctic night, moving through it with the steady endurance of men who have accepted that there is no easy way through this route. It is a passage that demands everything from them and offers nothing in return except the possibility of survival. They carry on regardless, because for them, this is not simply a voyage. It is their duty, their burden, and their quiet defiance against the vast, frozen world that refuses to make room for them. There is a moment in every long Arctic voyage when the convoy seems to settle into a single, unified rhythm. Ships that once felt separate now move with a shared pulse, guided by invisible lines of discipline and trust. You watch this begin to take shape as the convoy pushes deeper into the frozen route. What were once individual vessels now appear as parts of a larger organism, advancing in coordinated patterns across the dark water. Each ship maintains its exact place. The distances between them look narrow, almost dangerously so, but they are carefully calculated. Too much space invites submarines to slip in unnoticed. Too little space creates the risk of collision in rough water or sudden evasive maneuvers. The officers on every bridge understand these balances instinctively. They make constant adjustments, nudging rudders and engines to keep formation tight and precise. You can sense the tension behind this precision. It is not the loud, frantic kind that comes with gunfire or alarms. It is a slow, steady tension that sits beneath every decision and every movement. The sailors feel it in their muscles. The officers feel it in the weight of responsibility. The Arctic loves disorder, but the convoy must create order if it hopes to survive. On the lead escort vessel, the navigating officers monitor their charts with unwavering focus. They track the position of each ship, compare it with wind and current calculations, and adjust accordingly. Their work is meticulous. One miscalculation, one slow correction, and the convoy could drift into dangerous waters. Ice fields lie hidden to the east. Enemy patrol zones hover to the west. The path between them is narrow. It requires steady hands and steady minds. Behind the lead ship, the merchant vessels follow with almost ritualistic discipline. Their captains keep their eyes fixed on the faint shape ahead, measuring distance by instinct and instrument. The sailors on these ships often describe the feeling of following a ghost. In the Arctic's dim light, the vessel they depend on becomes little more than a dark, flickering outline moving through fog and shadow. And yet, they follow it faithfully. Each ship trusts the one before it, and the entire convoy depends on that chain of trust. The escort ships on the flanks move differently. They pace alongside the formation like watchful guardians, rising and falling with the waves in fluid, predatory motions. Their crews are trained for rapid response, scanning the sea for any sign of danger. These ships are the convoy's shield, their presence a silent reassurance to the slower, heavier merchant vessels. The men aboard them know that if an attack comes, they will be the first to meet it. You can see how the sailors on the merchant vessels view the escorts with a mixture of gratitude and quiet awe. The smaller ships seem to slice through the water with purpose, their guns always at the ready. Their crews move with a sharpness shaped by constant alertness. They are the ones who chase down submarines, who fire the first shots, who place themselves between the convoy and the threats that lurk in the deep. The men on the heavier ships know that without the escorts, their chances of reaching port would be slim. Despite the danger, there is a strange sense of companionship among the ships. Even though they are separated by distance and metal, they share the same conditions, the same cold, the same risks. When one ship encounters a sudden swell, the others rise to meet it a moment later. When the lead ship adjusts its course, the entire line bends with it, like a long, flexible spine adapting to the motion of the sea. You see this pattern repeated over and over again, until the rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. Inside the ships, the sailors become part of this rhythm as well. Watches are synchronized across the convoy. Meal times shift in unison. Engine checks follow a similar cadence, ensuring that no ship lags behind. The men breathe, move, and work within the same structured cycle, even though they may never speak to one another. The convoy binds them together through shared purpose rather than direct contact. Communication between ships is sparse. Lights are shielded. Radios are used sparingly to avoid detection. Instead, the convoy relies on coded signals, brief transmissions, and the quiet confidence that each ship knows what to do. Orders are clear but minimal. Any unnecessary chatter could reveal their position to listening ears beyond the horizon. You watch the signal officers work with a graceful efficiency. They raise and lower flags, flash lamps in short, measured bursts, and interpret the faint glimmers of light from other vessels. Their movements are quick but controlled, shaped by hours of training. They communicate entire strategies through gestures and flashes that last only seconds. In the Arctic, silence remains one of the convoy's most valuable defenses. As the day continues, the sea grows calmer for a rare moment. The wind softens. The waves smooth out into long, rolling motions that feel almost gentle compared to the storms of the night before. The sailors use this brief reprieve to catch their breath. They know it will not last long. Calm seas in the Arctic are like moments of truce. They come unexpectedly, linger briefly, and disappear without warning. During this lull, you can see how the convoy resembles a fleet of frozen monuments drifting through an ancient sea. The fog clings low around their hulls, and the ice on their masts sparkles faintly. Some sailors lean against the railings and look out across the formation. They see other men doing the same on other ships, tiny silhouettes outlined against the sky. A silent acknowledgement passes between them. They are not alone, even though the sea tries its best to convince them otherwise. In the engine rooms, the pace continues with unbroken intensity. Engineers monitor valves and gauges, adjusting steam pressure, fine-tuning engine speed, and checking for leaks. Their world is defined by heat, noise, and narrow spaces. They rarely see the ice that coats the deck above, but they feel its presence in the urgency of their work. They know that if the engines falter, the ship falters, and if one ship slows, the entire convoy is put at risk. Meanwhile, on the escort ships, the gunners perform their drills. They check the rangefinders, rotate the turrets, and scrape ice from metal surfaces that must remain free for when they are needed. Their eyes scan the horizon over and over again, searching for shapes that do not belong. They know that danger can emerge from any direction. The Arctic makes no promises. As afternoon fades into the first stages of a new Arctic night, the convoy tightens once more. The faint glow of the sky dims, and the ships begin to rely more on instruments than on sight. You watch the line of vessels glide forward, their movements steady and unified. The ocean becomes darker, the air colder. The formation becomes a single, determined shape moving through the shadowed world ahead. It is in this moment, as the last traces of daylight disappear, that you feel the convoy's true character reveal itself. The discipline is not forced. It is lived. It is the result of shared risk, shared hardship, and shared purpose. Each ship knows its role. Each man knows his duty. Together, they move as one, defying an environment that seems designed to break them apart. The night begins to rise around them again, deeper and heavier than before. But the convoy continues forward, its rhythm now fully set. A chain of steel, ice, and human resolve cutting across a frozen world. As the next stretch of evening settles over the Arctic, the convoy enters a zone where the weather grows unpredictable. The temperature drops again, the wind sharpens, and the sea begins to shift beneath the ships with a slow but unmistakable force. You sense how the men adjust instantly. Their bodies straighten. Their eyes sharpen. They have learned to read the Arctic not by sight alone, but through the subtle signals that ripple through the ships themselves. The hulls respond first. You can hear the creaking of metal as the cold tightens its grip. The decks stiffen, the ropes stiffen, and even the air feels dense, as if the atmosphere has thickened around the convoy. The sailors move with more caution now. Steps become more deliberate. Voices grow quieter. It is as though the ships themselves are urging silence. In the bridge of one of the merchant vessels, the captain watches the horizon through a small, frost-framed window. His breath fogs the glass as he leans forward, chart in hand. He studies the faint outline of the lead escort ship, its silhouette just visible in the dim light. Every course correction he makes depends on that shape. His crew stands beside him, awaiting instructions, their faces pale in the glow of the instruments. They know that precision is vital here. A deviation of even a few degrees could pull them out of alignment and into danger. Across the convoy, similar scenes unfold. On each bridge, officers and helmsmen stand ready, adjusting their course to maintain the perfect spacing that keeps the formation intact. They react not just to what they see, but to what they feel through the vibrations of the deck, through the subtle roll of the ship, through the rhythm of the engines beneath their boots. This shared awareness becomes the convoy's language. You notice that even the smallest gestures carry meaning. A raised hand, a nod toward the compass, a brief glance at the radio operator. These motions replace spoken instructions, preserving silence while ensuring that every officer remains fully aligned with the ship ahead. The Arctic demands this restraint. Too much noise, too much light, too much radio chatter could invite attention from threats the men would rather never see. Further back in the formation, the sailors working on the deck feel the change in sea conditions plainly. The wind pushes against them, and the ship sways with more force. Tasks that were challenging before become even more physically demanding. The men chip ice from the railings with a renewed sense of urgency. They know that a sudden swell could throw them off balance if the surfaces become too slick. They brace themselves with their knees bent and their shoulders angled into the wind, moving in a careful dance with the rolling deck. Even below decks, the rhythm shifts. In the engine rooms, the engineers feel the altered vibrations of the ship as the sea grows rougher. They tighten valves, monitor pressure, and prepare for any strain on the machinery. Their world remains a furnace of heat and noise, but they sense the Arctic's influence pressing down even here. The ship becomes a single body, and every part of it responds to the changing environment. Meanwhile, the escort vessels perform their own silent choreography. The destroyers glide along the flanks, adjusting speed and angle with an almost predatory grace. Their crews remain locked in a pattern of scanning and listening. They monitor sonar for faint echoes of underwater movement. They sweep the dark horizon with binoculars, searching for shapes that do not belong. They watch the sky for signs of approaching aircraft. Every man aboard these ships understands that vigilance is their contribution to the convoy's unity. You see how the men on the escorts have a different posture than those on the merchant ships. Their stance is more alert, more coiled. They carry the weight of responsibility for the entire formation. Their weapons must be ready at any moment. Their reactions must be immediate. And yet, even with this heightened tension, they move with a calm professionalism that reflects their training. They do not fidget. They do not falter. They stand ready. On some nights, the convoy passes through patches of sea where the fog thickens suddenly, swallowing the ships one by one. In these moments, formation becomes a test of intuition and discipline. The lead ships vanish from sight. The vessels behind them push forward into a grey wall that obscures everything except the faint glow of their own lamps. The men grow still, listening for the subtle hum of other engines nearby. They know the convoy is close, but the fog makes them feel alone. Inside this pale blur, sound behaves strangely. It becomes muffled, swallowed before it can reach far. A hammer striking ice sounds like a soft thud. A shout disappears into nothing. Even the engines seem quieter, as though the fog absorbs their vibrations. You can feel how disorienting it is for the sailors. For a few unsettling moments, the ships lose all visual reference points. They must trust their instruments completely. They must trust the invisible line that binds them to the ship ahead. When the fog finally begins to thin, and the faint outline of the next vessel reappears, you see a subtle shift in the sailors' shoulders. The tension does not vanish, but it eases slightly. The convoy re-emerges into view, a chain of silhouettes moving forward once more. The men settle back into their routines, grateful for the return of even limited visibility. During calmer stretches, the line of ships becomes a hauntingly beautiful sight. Lit only by their faint, shielded lamps, they move across the dark water like a caravan of floating lanterns. The ice that coats their masts and railings catches whatever light exists, creating shimmering edges that fade in and out with each roll of the sea. The men standing at their posts see this beauty, though they rarely comment on it. They have learned not to grow attached to moments in the Arctic. The environment shifts too quickly, too ruthlessly. As night deepens, the formation tightens again. The wind rises. The sea grows restless. The ships lean into the swells in near synchrony, their bows lifting and falling like the chest of a great sleeping creature. The convoy moves as one, a single chain resisting the force of the Arctic. You can sense how much effort this unity requires. Every ship, every man, every decision must align. If one vessel falters, the entire convoy becomes vulnerable. Inside the radio rooms, the operators begin to detect increased chatter on the encrypted frequencies that monitor enemy movements. There are reports of submarines patrolling certain lanes, of aircraft spotted in nearby sectors, of convoys that have faced sudden attacks without warning. These messages circulate between the escort ships quietly. The merchant vessels receive simplified updates, enough to keep them alert, but not enough to overwhelm them with fear. The tension rises subtly across the formation. On the bridges, captains tighten their grip on cold railings as they consider the possible threats ahead. In the gun stations, men check their equipment with more frequency. Below decks, engineers listen for any irregularities in the engines. No one says it aloud, but the convoy knows this stretch of the journey is entering a more dangerous zone. And yet, the ships continue to move forward with the same steady determination. They press through the darkness and the cold and the growing uncertainty with a unified discipline that defies the vast isolation around them. The Arctic tries to fragment them, to pull them apart with weather, fear, and distance. But the convoy holds together. It moves as one, because out here, unity is survival, and these sailors understand that better than anyone. There comes a point in every Arctic convoy when the cold is no longer the only adversary. The convoy has pushed far enough into enemy waters that the men feel a new kind of pressure growing around them, something sharper and more alert than the night or the storms. It is the sense of being watched. not by nature, but by enemies hidden in depths and skies. You feel it too as you observe the change. The atmosphere tightens. Movements become quicker, more focused. The sailors speak less, though they were already sparing with their words. The officers stand longer at their posts, scanning the horizon with a kind of strained patience. Every small sound takes on a different meaning. Every shift of the waves becomes something to analyze. The convoy is no longer just enduring the Arctic. It is entering a hunting ground. The first signs are subtle. A faint echo picked up by a sonar operator. A report from an escort ship that a shape was spotted on the edge of the radar. A short, crackling transmission from command warning of submarine activity in the region. These early signals draw the crews into a heightened state of alertness. They know that the German U-boats have been waiting for convoys like this one. They know that these waters have claimed many ships before. On the destroyers and corvettes, the men shift their stance. Their eyes narrow. Their hands rest closer to weapons and controls. The escort ships begin to move in more calculated patterns, sweeping the flanks and widening their arcs. They search for the faintest indication of movement beneath the waves. Sonar pings cut through the water in slow, rhythmic pulses, creating invisible circles of vigilance around the convoy. You watch the sonar rooms, where operators sit with headphones pressed tightly to their ears. They listen for changes in tone, for echoes that should not exist, for rhythms that do not match the ship's own machinery. Their work demands focus that borders on obsession. They know that a single misinterpreted sound can cost lives. They also know that a submarine can remain hidden until the very last moment. The tension in these rooms hangs like frost in the air. On the merchant ships, the sailors feel the tension even if they do not hear the coded warnings. They sense it in the more frequent patrols on deck, in the additional glances exchanged between officers, in the way the escort vessels seem to move with sharper purpose. They respond by becoming even more diligent. They check cargo lashings, inspect lifeboats, and adjust their gear. They know that if something happens, every second will matter. The sea itself seems to sense the shift. The waves roll with a heavier rhythm, rising against the hulls in long, broad swells. The cold deepens, creeping into the metal until every surface feels brittle. The water darkens as if preparing to hide whatever moves beneath it. The ships press forward in this thickening world, their engines pushing tirelessly against the weight of water and fear. Above, the sky becomes a new source of concern. Though often hidden by clouds, it is not forgotten. The threat of enemy aircraft lingers constantly, especially in regions where long-range patrols are known to operate. Whenever the clouds thin even slightly, lookouts scan the gaps for movement. They know that the German Luftwaffe sometimes sends solitary planes far into the Arctic, hunting for convoys spread across the frozen sea. The sailors understand that if aircraft appear, they will have little warning. The sound will come late. The shadows will come quickly. The attack will unfold faster than the men can fully process. And in this environment, fire on the water is a nightmare no one wishes to witness. So they keep their eyes on the sky, even when the wind lashes their faces with cold that burns like flame. In the midst of this heightened watchfulness, the convoy continues to move with quiet determination. It advances through a world that feels both vast and suffocating. The sea stretches infinitely in every direction, yet the presence of unseen threats makes it feel small and enclosed. The men know they are in enemy territory, but they do not know where the enemy waits. This uncertainty becomes its own kind of pressure. Inside the gunnery stations of the escort vessels, the sailors prepare their weapons with the careful movements of men who have done this many times. They clear frost from barrels, check ammunition storage, and ensure that mechanisms can move freely despite the cold. They whisper reminders to themselves about angles and timing. Their bodies hold a controlled readiness that seems to pulse with the very engine of the ship. Night falls again, though you sense that it never truly rose. The convoy becomes a line of dim shapes drifting across a darkened world, its presence almost ghostly against the Arctic Sea. Shielded lights glow faintly from the ships, but they reveal little. The darkness returns as the dominant element, swallowing the horizon and hiding whatever moves through it. In this deepening night, the escort vessels accelerate slightly. They pull ahead, sweep the sides, and fall back into place, repeating their patrol patterns with relentless consistency. Their movements look almost choreographed, a dance of steel and purpose across the black water. The merchant ships follow behind them like quiet giants, trusting their guardians without question. You watch the men on these escorts. Their silhouettes are stiff in the cold, their breath forming quick, pale clouds in the darkness. Their eyes move constantly across the sea, across the sky, across the dim shapes of the convoy itself. Every shadow becomes a possibility. Every ripple becomes a question. Every sound becomes a potential signal. Inside the merchant vessels, men sleep in short, restless intervals. Some dream of home. Others dream of waves and cold and alarms. Many dream of nothing at all, their minds too exhausted for imagery. The darkness presses on their thoughts, filling their dreams with a quiet heaviness they cannot shake when they wake. They rise to new watches with tired eyes but steady hands, stepping back into the same endless pattern of vigilance. Amid this tension, there are brief moments when the Arctic reminds the sailors that it remains indifferent to human conflict. A break in the clouds reveals a single star, faint and trembling. A thin ribbon of aurora pulses slowly along the horizon. A solitary chunk of ice glows ghost-white as it drifts past the hull. These moments do nothing to ease the danger, but they offer a strange sense of perspective, a reminder that the sea has been here long before the war and will remain long after it ends. Still, the men cannot dwell on beauty for long. Their focus must remain sharp. The convoy must stay tight. The escorts must stay alert. The night ahead holds too many unknowns. Somewhere in the vast darkness, steel shapes wait beneath the waves. Somewhere above the clouds, engines beat a predatory rhythm. Somewhere beyond the horizon, signals travel between enemy forces searching for this very convoy. And the convoy keeps moving forward, aware of the danger but unwilling to falter. Because there is no turning back. Not in these waters. Not with this mission. Not when so much depends on their survival. The hours that follow bring a deeper shift across the convoy, a subtle tightening of nerves that moves from ship to ship. It is not sparked by a single event, but by a growing accumulation of signs that the hunters are near. These men have sailed the Arctic route enough times to recognize the pattern. The silence feels different. The sea feels different. Even the wind seems to carry a restlessness that is hard to explain. The officers on the escort vessels feel it first. Their instruments begin to pick up faint irregularities, brief distortions that might be nothing, or might be something waiting below. Radar screens show flickers that vanish before they can be identified. Sonar pulses return with echoes that seem slightly off, as if there are shapes beneath the surface just beyond the edge of detection. No one declares these as threats, but no one dismisses them either. You can sense how the men respond to these subtle warnings. The commanders become more present on the bridges. The lookouts adopt a stillness that borders on statuesque, their eyes fixed on the waves and sky. The tension does not erupt into panic. It settles instead like a second skin over everyone on board. The convoy tightens further. The ships draw closer together until they form a compact column that moves with deliberate precision. The escorts glide into defensive positions, accelerating to sweep the perimeters before returning to their places with stern, measured grace. Their engines growl more deeply now, pushing through the water with purpose. Their movements suggest sharpened awareness rather than fear. On the merchant ships, the sailors read the signs in their own way. They follow the changing routines, the quicker pace of the officers, the faint but unmistakable shifts in formation. They feel the change even if they do not hear the coded radio transmissions. Many spend more time on deck, staring out across the water as if they can catch a glimpse of whatever waits beneath. They talk less. Their breaths appear harsher in the cold. Even their jokes, whispered between tasks, sound different now, shorter, quieter, shaped by nerves. As the convoy advances, the Arctic's dim light fades until only a faint glow remains along the horizon. The sky becomes a vast dome of blue-black shadow, layered with streaks of drifting cloud. The darkness grows heavier with every hour, as though the sea and sky are conspiring to hide the threats that stalk this formation. You feel the shift in pressure as the men do. The night ahead is not just dark, it is charged. Then comes the first tangible sign. A sonar operator aboard an escort vessel hears a faint return that does not match any known pattern. He does not shout. He speaks in a steady, controlled voice, reporting the anomaly to the bridge. The officers lean in. They listen. The sonar pings again, slow and regular. The echo returns, faint but distinct enough to mark a possibility. A submerged shape. Moving. Watching. This is how many encounters begin, not with explosions, but with murmurs. The escort vessel alters course by a few degrees. Its engines increase power. The ship slides out of formation and glides across the convoy's flank, tracing a protective arc that expands and tightens with calculated precision. The sailors aboard brace themselves for a confrontation that may come suddenly or may never come at all. This uncertainty hangs in the air like frost. The convoy does not stop. It cannot. It continues forward, disciplined and precise. But every man aboard knows that somewhere in the black water around them, an enemy may be matching their movement. The thought settles heavily in their minds. The merchant crews begin preparing for what could follow. Lifeboats are inspected with greater urgency. Lines are tightened. Boots are checked for dryness. Men put on layers they might normally save for colder conditions. They know that submarines strike hard and fast. If the order to abandon ship ever comes, they will need every second they can save. As the escort vessel sweeps the water, the sonar signals fluctuate. Sometimes the echo sharpens. Sometimes it vanishes. Sometimes it shifts slightly to the left or right, as if the source is moving. The officers debate silently through gestures and short phrases. There is no panic here, only calculation. They know that attacking without confirmation wastes precious depth charges. They know that hesitation can be fatal. The rhythm of this silent chase stretches across the night. Minutes feel long. Seconds feel sharp. The sea feels deeper. Then, almost as quickly as it appeared, the echo fades. The water returns to its usual, steady pulse. The sonar grows quiet again. The escort vessel completes its arc and returns to formation. No alarm is sounded. No explosion breaks the surface. The threat, if it was real, has passed into the depths again, or chosen to wait for a better moment. The sailors know what this means. They were not imagining it. A predator was nearby. But predators are patient. The convoy continues. Hours later, the sky clears unexpectedly. The clouds thin, revealing patches of stars trembling over the Black Sea. This sudden clarity is both beautiful and dangerous. Enemy aircraft prefer nights like this. They can see more. They can strike without warning. The sailors look up instinctively. Their eyes scan the gaps in the clouds for movement. The escort ships adjust their formations again, creating wider detection arcs. Anti-aircraft crews stand ready. Their hands grip cold metal. Their shoulders tense. They watch the sky with a mixture of dread and discipline. They know the sound of engines could come from anywhere, masked at first by wind and wave. You feel the weight of this phase of the journey, the moment suspended between readiness and fear. The convoy is silent, but not still. It moves through the heart of danger with a resilience that feels almost defiant. Then, in the far distance, a lookout aboard one of the escorts sees something shift in the sky. A small, quick flicker. A faint silhouette moving between clouds. At this distance, it could be a bird or a shadow, or the beginning of something far more dangerous. He signals quietly. The officers look. They adjust course by a small fraction. The formation tightens again. Nothing happens yet. No alarm, no attack, no confirmation. But the convoy feels the threat closing, the noose tightening, the hunters circling. And still, the ships move forward, silent and resolute. For this is the Murmansk Run. And on this route, every hour survived is a victory. There is a point in every Arctic voyage when the cold stops being a condition and becomes a presence. It is no longer something the sailors endure. It becomes something that presses against them with intent, creeping into every gap it can find, turning the ships into monuments of frost and metal. You sense that the convoy has reached this point now. The temperature plunges without warning, and the air grows so sharp that breathing feels like inhaling shards of glass. The wind changes first. It strengthens into a sustained, punishing force that carries crystals of frozen sea spray through the air. The spray freezes the moment it touches anything solid. Railings thicken. Guy wires swell into icy cables. The decks develop a translucent sheen that makes every step treacherous. Even the small lamps glow dimly behind layers of frost that form faster than sailors can clear them. The men feel the shift instantly. They tighten their coats, adjust their scarves, and pull their gloves higher up their wrists. Some rub their hands together vigorously, trying to keep blood flowing. Others stomp their boots against the deck to shake off the numbness creeping into their toes. They have faced cold before, but this is different. This is the cold that settles into bones and refuses to leave. You watch as the sailors form ice-clearing teams that move along the decks with tools in hand. Their movements are stiff and repetitive. They swing hammers and axes against the ice with rhythmic determination. Chips fly off in small bursts, catching the faint light before disappearing over the side. The sound of tools striking metal echoes across the ship, merging with the wind into a harsh, relentless symphony. Each strike is more than a task. It is a battle, because the ice is no longer an inconvenience. It is a threat. If left unchecked, it will accumulate until it shifts the ship's center of gravity. Too much ice can pull a vessel into a dangerous lean, making it vulnerable to capsizing in rough seas. The men know this, so they keep working even as their fingers stiffen and their breath crystallizes around their faces. On the escort vessels, the situation is even more critical. Their narrower hulls and lighter frames make them more sensitive to ice buildup. The sailors chip constantly, moving along the length of their ships in coordinated patterns. The officers call out orders that cut through the wind with strained clarity. Time is their enemy here. The ice grows faster than any man can swing a hammer. Inside the ships, the cold asserts itself in subtler ways. Pipes creak. The metal bulkheads feel colder to the touch than they should. Condensation freezes along interior surfaces, forming thin trails of frost that grow during every watch. In the sleeping quarters, men huddle under blankets wearing full layers of clothing, their breath turning the air into a cold mist that lingers around their bunks. The engine rooms offer a stark contrast. Down there, heat radiates from the machinery with overwhelming intensity. Sweat drips from the faces of engineers, only to freeze almost instantly when they climb back onto the deck. The shift from the engine room to the Arctic air is brutal. Their bodies struggle to adjust, lungs tightening from the sudden drop in temperature. And yet they keep moving, because the engines must not falter. If the engines slow even slightly, the ship becomes more vulnerable to ice accumulation. As the hours pass, the storm builds. Snow begins to fall in dense waves, carried sideways by the wind. The flakes are sharp, more like fragments of ice than soft powder. They sting exposed skin and blind the men who face into the gusts. Visibility drops until the ship ahead becomes a faint, ghostly outline. The men move with caution, gripping railings and ropes as the deck tilts beneath their boots. In the wheelhouses, officers struggle to maintain course in the blinding conditions. The windows frost over in minutes, forcing them to scrape constantly just to keep a slim view of the sea. Instruments become their lifeline. Compasses, depth gauges, and radio bearings guide them through a world they can barely see. The crews trust these tools more than their own eyes, because the Arctic has turned sight into a liability. The convoy slows slightly, its rhythm disrupted by the storm. The escort vessels weave closer to the merchant ships, creating a tighter shield around the formation. Their hulls slam against waves that rise higher and faster than before, throwing sprays of freezing water onto their decks. Some men are knocked off balance, sliding across the slick metal before grabbing hold of a rail or a rope. It takes all their strength to stay upright. The storm's cold is merciless. Fingers numb quickly. Faces redden and burn from wind exposure. Eyelashes freeze together. When sailors speak, their words emerge in bursts of frost that hang in the air for a moment before vanishing. The cold becomes something the men carry with them. It clings to their clothes, their tools, their breath. Even inside the ship, the chill seems to seep through the walls. You sense how exhaustion forms in layers. Physical exhaustion from the constant chipping. Mental exhaustion from the endless vigilance. Emotional exhaustion from the knowledge that this cold can take a life as easily as an enemy attack. And yet, the sailors persevere. They move along the decks with the stubbornness of men who refuse to yield. Their steps may be slow, but they are sure. Their hands may tremble, but they keep working. Their breaths may be shallow, but they keep breathing into the cold, refusing to let it claim them. As night deepens and the storm reaches its peak, something changes. You notice it in the way the ice forms more aggressively, in the way the ships struggle to maintain formation, in the way the officers exchange tense glances. The cold is not just challenging them anymore. It is testing their limits. The convoy enters a region where temperatures fall so low that the sea itself begins to behave differently. Waves stiffen. The surface grows thick and slushy, as if preparing to freeze. Sheets of ice form between the swells, breaking apart under the ship's hulls with deep, resonant cracks. The sailors look out into this world and see a landscape half liquid, half solid, an in-between realm that feels more hostile than either alone. This is the part of the Arctic most men fear. Not the storms, not the submarines, but the cold that takes on a life of its own. the cold that can freeze metal, slow engines, and overwhelm entire crews. And tonight, that cold is rising around them with a focus that feels almost deliberate. The storm does not ease. It grows into something larger, heavier, and more consuming. The air turns so cold that even sound seems slower, as if the wind needs time to carry it. The ships press forward through this frozen fury, their hulls coated in layers of ice so thick they resemble drifting sculptures rather than vessels built for war. You sense that the men aboard them begin to feel small in a way no battlefield could ever make them feel. On deck, the chipping teams work until their movements blur into habit. Arms swing without pause. Shoulders strain. Fingers throb beneath wet gloves that freeze stiff within minutes. The men strike at ice that seems determined to return faster than they can break it. They chip railings down to metal, only to find them rimed with frost again by the time they reach the next section. Their breath forms clouds so dense they look like smoke in the dim light. Some sailors begin to show early signs of frostbite, though they try to hide it. They rub their hands through their gloves, trying to revive feeling. They stamp their feet to shake out numbness that creeps up from their toes. A few remove gloves briefly to adjust tools, only to wince at the shock of cold against bare skin. They know they should not do this, but sometimes necessity outruns caution. And still, the ice grows. You see the officers move among the men, urging them onward with firm gestures rather than raised voices. They know that shouting against the storm only wastes breath and energy. They speak close, leaning in so their words can be heard above the wind. Their faces show the strain of responsibility. If the ice wins, the ship loses. If the ship loses, the convoy weakens. Every man on deck understands the stakes. The storm's rhythm pounds against the hulls, shaking the ships with deep, resonant force. Water freezes instantly wherever it lands. Ladders turn slick. Hatches turn rigid. Even ropes stiffen until they feel like wooden poles. The sailors tug at them with both hands, trying to keep critical lines flexible enough to use. Their gloves stick to the frozen fibers. Their boots slip on glassy patches that form under the snow. Below decks, the storm expresses itself differently. The cold seeps through the steel walls, turning sleeping quarters into chambers of breath-frosted air. Blankets stiffen. Clothing dries slower. The men who try to rest do so in tight curls beneath layers of fabric, but even then the cold reaches them. Dreams become shallow. Rest becomes a negotiation rather than a necessity. In the engine rooms, sweat becomes an enemy. The heat is intense, almost unbearable, and the engineers work stripped to their undershirts. But when they climb the narrow ladders to the deck for inspections or changes of shift, their sweat freezes instantly. It forms icy ridges along collars, cuffs, and hairlines. Their bodies shiver with violent force as they adjust to the sudden, crushing cold. They must take care not to rush out too quickly, or the shock could knock the strength out of their limbs. The officers on the bridges struggle to maintain visibility. Frost forms on windows faster than they can scrape it away. They clear small horizontal slits with the edges of gloved hands, peering into the indistinct world outside. Their view is limited to a few meters of deck and the faint silhouette of the ship ahead. They rely on compasses, radio bearings, and instinct to guide them. In these conditions, vision becomes a luxury. The convoy adjusts its formation slowly, drifting into tighter positions. The ships move closer together to preserve cohesion in the storm. This proximity is dangerous. The margin for error narrows with every meter. A slight miscalculation could bring two ships into collision. And yet, the sailors prefer closeness to the alternative. Distance means vulnerability. Proximity means survival through unity. As the storm deepens, the sea begins to change in ways that unsettle even the most experienced sailors. The water loses its familiar role and becomes thicker. It moves like a heavy, cold syrup beneath the hulls. Slush gathers along the surface, swirling in pale, frozen patches that break apart when struck by the bows. The ships grind through these icy fields with low, rumbling sounds that resonate through every deck. The sailors watch this transformation with quiet dread. They know that if the temperature drops any further, the sea will begin to freeze more solidly. If that happens, the convoy risks becoming trapped in a frozen corridor, unable to maneuver against currents or escape enemy threats. The Arctic does not need explosives or torpedoes to destroy a ship. It can crush it slowly, relentlessly, without a sound. You can sense how the men begin to measure time differently now. Not by hours or watches, but by how long they can keep their bodies moving before the cold claims too much from them. Their tasks become smaller, more focused. Clearing ice from a railing, checking a hatch, tightening a line, returning to the stern. Their world shrinks to whatever section of deck they must conquer in that moment. The storm dims the horizon until the convoy becomes a drifting collection of blurred shapes, each ship swallowed by a curtain of white. The wind roars against them, turning the air into a relentless river of frozen particles. Snow does not fall gently here. It attacks. It blankets every surface, compounding the weight already added by the ice. And still, even in this chaos, the sailors find ways to endure. They move in pairs, supporting each other when footing becomes uncertain. They share the warmth of their breath in brief moments of shelter behind bulkheads. They pass flasks of strong tea between gloved hands, savoring the heat before it fades. These small acts of resilience form the backbone of the convoy's survival. At one point, a sudden gust pushes a wave of ice-cold spray onto the deck. It freezes instantly, forming a sheet that sends two sailors sliding toward the rail. They stop themselves just in time, gripping the nearest handhold. Their breathing is rapid, their eyes wide, but they push themselves upright and return to their work. There is no time to dwell on close calls. The storm demands their full attention. Inside the radio rooms, the static loudens. The operator adjusts dials with practiced precision, trying to decipher partial messages that come through broken and faint. Warnings from command, updates on weather, hints of enemy movement. The Arctic distorts everything. The warmth from the equipment barely touches the operator's hands. He pulls his sleeves lower, focusing his entire being on catching every fragment of information. Above deck, lookouts battle the wind to keep their positions. Their eyelashes freeze together. Their faces burn with cold. But they keep scanning the storm-darkened world. Even in this wideout, danger can appear. A U-boat, a drifting iceberg, a ship in distress. Their vigilance creates a thin thread of safety that the convoy depends on. Hours stretch. The storm shows no sign of weakening. The cold shows no hint of mercy. And yet, the convoy moves on, because these men have no other choice. Their mission does not pause for storms. Their cargo cannot wait for clearer skies. Their survival depends on movement. And so they face the cold not as an obstacle, but as an adversary to be endured, one blow at a time, one frozen breath at a time. The ice takes its toll on their bodies, their ships, and their minds. But it does not stop them. Not yet. For they still have dangers ahead far greater than the storm. There comes a stage in the Arctic Passage when the danger is not only in the ice or the wind or the submarines lurking below. It is in the slow, steady exhaustion that begins to freeze itself into the men. It settles in their muscles, creeps into their minds, and dulls the instinct that keeps them alert. You see its first signs in the way the sailors move. Their steps drag slightly. Their shoulders sag more noticeably. Their breaths become shorter and sharper, squeezed by cold and fatigue alike. The storm has diminished, but the cold that remains is sharper, more personal. It rests on the deck like a living weight and sinks into the sailors' bones with deliberate patience. The men wear layer upon layer of wool and leather, yet the cold still finds its way through. It numbs their fingers, stiffens their joints, and leaves their faces raw. Their eyes narrow against the wind until the eyelids themselves feel heavy. You watch them as they return to their routines, but their movements lack the energy seen earlier in the voyage. They swing tools with less force. They pause more often at the rail to rest their arms. And when they walk the deck at night, the once determined strides have become steps measured by necessity rather than confidence. They are not broken, but they are wearing thin. Inside the mess halls, the atmosphere has changed as well. The warmth that once brought momentary comfort now feels insufficient. A thin mist of cold hovers even here, following the sailors no matter how many layers separate them from the Arctic wind. Steam rises from mugs of tea in pale ribbons, fading quickly into the chilling air. The sailors hold their cups close, absorbing what little heat they can. Their conversations are quieter now, not because of any rule, but because they no longer have energy to spare. They speak in short phrases about the tasks ahead, about how much ice still clings to the deck, about when they might grab a few hours of sleep. The laughter that occasionally broke the tension earlier in the journey is almost absent now. When someone does smile, it is faint and fleeting, fading as quickly as the steam from their drink. The officers notice the shift. They see how the men stand during roll call, how their bodies lean slightly, how their faces hold the expression of people pushing against something larger than themselves. The officers do not lecture or scold. They simply adjust the routine. They rotate shifts more frequently. They send men below deck to warm up before exhaustion turns dangerous. They check hands for frostbite and insist on rest when needed. But even these changes cannot fully protect the men from the Arctic's quiet pressure. In the quieter spaces of the ship, you see the toll more clearly. A sailor sits on his bunk, rubbing his hands together, trying to coax warmth back into fingers that no longer obey his commands. Another stares at the ceiling, unable to sleep even though his eyes are heavy. In a corner, two men share a silent moment, passing a blanket between them as if the extra layer could make a difference. These are not dramatic gestures. They are simple attempts to keep going. The cold affects their minds as much as their bodies. Thoughts become slower, drifting through layers of exhaustion. Decisions take more effort. Attention fractures more easily. The men fight this with routine, cleaning tools, adjusting gear, checking the same rope twice. Ritual becomes a shield. Predictability becomes a form of strength. On the merchant ships, this mental fatigue shows in the way messages are repeated, in the way orders are clarified multiple times, in the way officers step in to correct small mistakes before they become dangerous. No one is blamed. Everyone understands. Fatigue is the one enemy that cannot be fought directly. It must be endured. On the escort vessels, the strain is sharper. Their tasks demand constant readiness. Sonar operators listen for hours at a time with unwavering focus, even as their minds beg for rest. Gunners stand at their posts long after their bodies protest. Navigators check bearings over and over, aware that a single moment of inattention could send the ship, and the convoy, off course. Exhaustion becomes something the entire convoy carries, like a shared burden. Sometimes, when the wind softens for a moment, the men lift their heads and look out across the sea. The horizon stretches endlessly, framed by layers of faint gray and blue. The world feels vast and eternal, and in those quiet seconds, a strange thought flickers through the mind of many sailors, that they have become part of something larger, something ancient, something indifferent to their presence. It is a humbling realization. It is also a frightening one, for in the face of such vastness, courage feels fragile. Not gone, but fragile. There are moments when a sailor rests his gloved hand on the railing, letting the cold bite through even the thickest fabric. He looks out into the empty expanse and feels the weight of the journey pressing against him. He thinks of home, of warmth, of conversations that do not involve ice or storms or submarines. He wonders how much farther they must go. He wonders how much more the cold will ask from them. And then he returns to his task, not because he feels ready, but because he must. This is how courage survives in the Arctic, not as fire, not as certainty, but as a slow endurance that persists even when the body wants to stop. You see it in the sailor who continues chipping ice with numb arms, in the officer who stands watch 2 hours longer so his men can rest, in the stoker who shovels fuel into the roaring engine despite the dizziness creeping into his vision, in the lookout who keeps his frozen eyes on the horizon because no one else can take his place. Courage, in this world, does not announce itself. It whispers. It waits. It holds on. And the convoy continues forward, driven not by strength that roars, but by strength that endures, quiet, persistent, and invisible to all but those who must carry it. As the convoy pushes farther into the Arctic night, the cold begins carving itself into the men in ways that no uniform or training can fully protect against. It shifts from a physical sensation into a quiet, persistent pressure that follows them through every corridor and watch post. You see it in their posture, in the way they lean slightly, as if bracing themselves against an invisible weight. You sense it in their eyes, where the fire that once burned with determination now flickers behind a film of exhaustion. Small tasks start taking longer. Gloves grow stiff. Tools feel heavier. Time feels slower. What used to be a simple walk across the deck now becomes a test of balance and will. Every footstep must be deliberate. Every handhold must be chosen carefully. The sailors move as though they are pushing through an unseen current. The cold has seeped beneath their skin, making even their own joints feel foreign. Inside the ships, the dim red lamps cast long shadows in the narrow hallways. The air itself seems to hold its breath, as if silence has deepened into something tangible. Sailors walk through these corridors with a slow, determined gait of men who have forgotten what warmth feels like. Their boots echo softly on the metal floor, but even this sound seems muted by the surrounding frost. In the mess hall, the mood has grown heavier. The laughter that once offered brief relief has faded into tired half-smiles. Men sit close together, not out of comfort, but out of instinct, as if proximity alone can fend off the numbness inside them. They wrap their hands around steaming cups, absorbing whatever heat remains before the Arctic air steals it. Some stare into their drinks for long moments, gathering the strength to drink. Others barely touch their food, too exhausted to chew. You notice how conversations drift now. They move slowly, without direction. One man mentions his hometown but trails off halfway through the sentence. Another begins recalling a warm night by a summer river and stops, as though the memory hurts more than it comforts. No one scolds them for this. The Arctic does that on its own. The officers sense the slipping morale. They try to offer steadiness without drawing attention to fatigue. They give men brief pauses from deck duty, insist on warm fluids, adjust schedules by minutes or half-hours to distribute strain more evenly. These gestures are small in the grand scale of the journey, but here they matter deeply. They are reminders that the convoy is not held together by metal alone. But the cold does not relent. It finds cracks in discipline. It finds cracks in spirit. You witness a sailor stand on deck during a night watch, his body swaying with exhaustion. His grip slips on the railing for a moment, just a moment, and he catches himself with a sudden jolt. His breath rushes out in a violent plume of frost. No one saw it except you, but that near fall lingers in his posture, in his trembling hands, in the way he takes one slow step back, grounding himself again. He stays at his post until relieved, because leaving is not an option. Fatigue does not excuse the duty. Elsewhere, a young radioman rubs his eyes with the back of his glove, unable to clear the fog from his vision. He leans closer to the equipment, listening to the faint static that has begun to blur into a rhythmic pulse. His mind strains to stay focused as exhaustion chews at the edges of his concentration. He repeats transmissions twice, 3 times, even when they are clear. He knows mistakes can cost lives, but his hands shake now, and his pulse races without warning. When his superior arrives and quietly replaces him, he doesn't protest. He simply nods and steps away, shoulders lowered beneath a weight he cannot name. On the escort vessels, the strain is even more pronounced. Their roles demand constant vigilance, and vigilance is the first thing exhaustion targets. The gunners' eyes burn from wind exposure as they scan the horizon. Their fingers ache against metal handles. Their breaths come in shallow bursts as they brace themselves against gusts that threaten to knock them from their feet. They know that if an attack comes, adrenaline may not be enough to sharpen their minds quickly. This thought lingers in the background, dampening whatever courage they still cling to. In quieter corners of the ships, men allow themselves brief moments of vulnerability. A sailor unwraps a frozen scarf from around his neck and holds it in his hands, staring at how stiff it has become. Another studies the thin layer of frost forming inside the porthole glass, tracing the patterns with a finger before pulling his hand back quickly. One man closes his eyes and mutters something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a thought meant only for himself, before returning to his duties without hesitation. These moments accumulate. They do not break the men, but they change them. Even the bravest among them begin to carry a quiet tremor inside, the kind that comes not from fear, but from relentless endurance. Their courage, once bright and steady, now looks different. It has hardened into something colder, more fragile, more worn. You can see it in the way they move, slow but steady, tired but unyielding. There are times when fatigue blurs the senses so thoroughly that danger passes unnoticed until it is close. A lookout squints into the darkness and blinks several times before realizing he has been looking at the wrong sector of sky. A sailor on deck pauses for a few seconds too long before responding to a call. These lapses are brief, but they carry weight. The officers acknowledge them with silent understanding. No reprimand, no raised voice, just a steadying hand or a simple order to rest. And yet, through all this, the convoy continues forward, not by force, not by momentum, but by a collective refusal to yield. That refusal is courage in its rawest, quietest form. Not a shout, not a charge, just a breath drawn when the air burns the lungs, a step taken when the legs beg for rest, a task completed though the body protests. You see it in the way a sailor steadies his trembling hand before gripping a tool. You see it in the way another braces his shoulder against a frozen door to force it open. You see it in the officers who stand a little straighter when their men look to them. You see it in the engineers who stoke the engine again and again, never letting the heartbeat of the ship falter. Courage here is thin, frost-covered, and deeply human, and though it bends, though it trembles, though it slows, it does not break. Not yet. Because the men know the Arctic will only get colder from here, and they will need every remaining thread of strength to face what the next days will bring. There comes a moment in every difficult journey when the human spirit reveals itself in unexpected ways, not as a surge of sudden heroism, but as something steadier, a quiet, persistent strength that settles deep inside the men who endure. On the Murmansk Run, this moment does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives softly, in the long hours after exhaustion has grown roots, in the stretches of cold when the world seems stripped of everything except breath and will. You see it begin in the way the sailors move after days of battering storms and nights without rest. Their bodies remain tired, but their steps become more deliberate. Their shoulders straighten again, even if only by a fraction. Their eyes regain a small measure of alertness. This is not recovery. It is resilience asserting itself, quietly but unmistakably. The cold still cuts through every layer of clothing, and fatigue still presses against them like a slow tide. But the men have reached a point where endurance becomes its own form of clarity. They know where the limits of their bodies lie, and they have learned to work just beyond those limits without breaking. They speak less, but their silence feels different now, not haunted but focused. On deck, the ice-clearing teams continue their rounds with the same tools, the same gestures, the same rhythm. But something in their posture has changed. Their movements, though slow, have purpose. Each swing of a hammer lands with steady conviction. Each scrape of metal against frozen railing sounds sharper, cleaner, more certain. The men are not stronger than before. They are simply more resolved. You notice how they begin to check on each other in subtle ways. A gloved hand taps another shoulder. A brief nod confirms readiness. A shared glance measures whether a man needs a moment's rest. These gestures are small, almost invisible in the wind and frost, but they carry weight. They reveal a shift that the Arctic cannot freeze out of them, the understanding that survival comes not from individual toughness, but from collective endurance. Inside the ships, men who once collapsed into their bunks now take a few minutes to help one another with gear. One sailor adjusts another's scarf. Another checks a friend's boots for cracks where ice might seep in. They do not speak while doing this. They simply work with quiet hands and tired but steady eyes. In the mess hall, the air remains cold, but the atmosphere has gained a subtle warmth of its own. The sailors still huddle around their mugs of steaming tea, still breathe in quick, pale bursts of frost, but now their conversations begin to return in small fragments. A remark about the weather, a muttered complaint about the ice, a brief exchange about the last watch. Nothing profound, nothing lengthy, but it is enough to shift the energy in the room. Even laughter, faint and fragile, begins to appear again. Not full laughter, a sound more like a warm breath carried on cold air. But it is laughter nonetheless, and here it carries meaning far beyond its volume. It is a sign that the cold has not taken everything from them. On the escort vessels, the sailors' resilience shows differently. Their tasks demand sharper focus, and they meet this demand with renewed steadiness. The gunners clean their weapons with methodical precision. The lookouts maintain their posts without complaint. The officers accept the weight of decisions with steadier hands. Their nerves may be frayed, but their discipline holds fast. You see fatigue in them still, in the slight shake of a hand when they remove a glove, in the slow blink that lasts a second too long, but you also see determination, a refusal to surrender even the smallest piece of their duty to the cold. The radio men, drained from hours of static and broken signals, sit taller at their stations. They adjust dials with more confidence, listening to the fragmented messages that drift through the Arctic interference. They record every detail carefully, knowing that clarity can mean life or death for the convoy. Even the engineers, trapped in the sweltering heat of the engine rooms and the freezing shock of the decks above, move with a renewed steadiness. Their hands remain rough and blistered from constant work, but their grip is firm when they stoke the boilers. They check gauges with practiced focus. They know the engine cannot falter, and they carry that weight without complaint. What you notice most is not what the men say, for they say little, but what they do. Every action carries intention. Every step has purpose. Every task is completed not just because it must be done, but because they choose to do it for each other. Out on deck, between the shrinking stars and the rising frost, you sense the beginning of a new phase of the journey. The Arctic is as merciless as ever, the cold no softer, the winds no kinder. But the men stand differently now. Not warmer, not stronger, but steadier. They have become a crew shaped by hardship, bound by shared endurance. They have become sailors who refuse to break. Because here, in the middle of the frozen sea, courage is not fire, it is ice. It is cold, quiet, and persistent. It does not blaze. It endures. The Arctic does not reward strength. It rewards persistence. And by now, the sailors have reached a place where persistence becomes the only measure that matters. You see it in the way they carry themselves across the frozen decks. Their movements may be slow, but they are sure. Their faces may be drawn, but their eyes hold a steady focus that was not there before. Something has taken root inside them, a kind of resilience that grows not from comfort, but from adversity. The cold still bites without remorse. It freezes eyelashes, stiffens joints, cracks the skin beneath gloves. Yet the men respond with a quiet defiance. They chip ice as if challenging it directly. They scrub frost from the railings with renewed determination. Their tools strike the frozen metal with a kind of steady rhythm that suggests not desperation, but acceptance. They do not fight the Arctic anymore. They work with it, against it, through it. You sense how the convoy itself reflects this shift. The ships no longer look like vessels struggling through a hostile world. They move like a unit with purpose, shaped and tempered by days of hardship. The storm's chaos has passed, replaced by a kind of disciplined silence. Each ship knows its place. Each man knows his role. Inside the ships, the transformation shows in subtle ways. The sailors sit straighter during brief rests, even when fatigue continues to weigh on them. Their conversations remain minimal, but the silences between them feel shared rather than empty. Exhaustion still presses on their bodies, but no longer in the same destabilizing way. They have adapted to it, taken its measure, and learned to operate within its limits. In the mess hall, the atmosphere has shifted from bleak to steady. The men no longer stare into empty space as if the journey stretches beyond imagination. Instead, they conserve energy with intention. They eat quietly, but their movements are purposeful. They help each other with frozen buckles and stuck zippers without exchanging more than a few words. This quiet cooperation has become part of the rhythm of survival. Sometimes, as they sit beneath the dim lamps, one sailor lifts a cup of steaming liquid and holds it for a moment before drinking. Not rushing, not desperate, just taking a breath to appreciate the small warmth in his hands. It is not joy, exactly, but it is something close to calm. On the escort vessels, the renewed steadiness becomes even more visible. The gunners stand at their posts with the same focus as before, but now their movements carry a deeper assurance. They clean their equipment with deliberate precision. They breathe slowly, anchoring themselves against the wind. They are still tired, but they are no longer tired in a way that clouds judgment. The lookouts, their faces reddened by cold, scan the horizon with a focus sharpened by days of vigilance. They know what signs to watch for: the faint ripple of a periscope, the unnatural shape of a conning tower, the movement of aircraft in distant gaps of sky. Their vigilance is not frantic. It is practiced, trained, internalized. Below deck, the engineers embody this same determination. Their tasks have not lightened, yet their posture has changed. They approach the roaring machinery with a calm efficiency that speaks of deep familiarity. Their hands, cracked from cold and stained with oil, move with steady certainty. They no longer rush between tasks. They work in a measured flow that keeps the engine alive without wasting a scrap of energy. The radio men, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, tune into broken signals with a focus that seems almost meditative. They record, decipher, adjust, and listen again. Their work exists in a world beyond the storm and cold, a world of frequencies and fragments. And yet they hold their ground, leaning into each transmission as if the clarity they seek is within reach. What is most striking, though, is not any single task or moment, but the collective posture of the men. They move like sailors who have accepted the scale of what they face and chosen not to yield to it. They are not fearless, far from it, but their fear has become something manageable, something carried rather than fought. You notice it in the way a sailor stands during watch, one gloved hand resting on a frozen railing. His breath forms steady clouds. His gaze is fixed far into the dark, but there is a quiet anchoring in his stance. He is tired. He is cold. But he is present. Fully present. Moments like this echo throughout the convoy. A cook wiping frost from his counter before preparing warm broth. A mechanic tightening bolts with numb fingers but unwavering focus. A deckhand pulling ice from a vent until the metal shines again. A navigator tracing routes with a pencil that trembles only slightly from cold. These gestures, repeated endlessly, form the backbone of resilience. Occasionally, a small spark of humanity breaks through the frozen silence. A sailor hums a tune under his breath. Another quotes a line from a book he barely remembers. Someone mentions a memory of sunlight in summer, not to lament its absence, but to remind himself it exists. These moments are fleeting, but they matter. They are proof that beneath the layers of frost and fatigue, something warm still persists. The Arctic tries to erase identity. The sailors refuse to let it. Even the way they stand says something. Straight-backed against the wind. Shoulders squared despite the weight of their coats. Eyes focused when they could just as easily drift. What emerges from all this is a quiet, collective defiance, not loud enough to provoke the sea, but strong enough to survive it. They refuse to break. They refuse to surrender to the cold. They refuse to let the Arctic define them, because each man carries a reason, some deeply personal, some simple, some unspoken, to keep moving forward. A promise, a memory, a hope, a duty, a name waiting at home, or simply the belief that if one more mile is endured, the next one will feel possible too. And so the convoy presses onward, carried by ships battered by ice and men shaped by hardship, not because they feel strong, but because they choose to be steadfast, because endurance, here, is the only path through the frozen world that surrounds them, and the sailors of the Murmansk Run, exhausted, frozen, and unyielding, become the very embodiment of that endurance. There is a point on the Murmansk Run when the sea stops feeling like an opponent and begins to feel like a witness, a silent observer to suffering that grows slowly, steadily, without interruption. You sense that the convoy has crossed into that territory now, a region where danger gathers like a slow-forming storm, where instinct whispers that something is about to change. The cold remains crushing, but a shift in atmosphere brings a new kind of tension. It begins subtly, in the way officers stand closer to their instruments, in the way lookouts narrow their eyes at shadows that might be nothing or might be everything. The weather grows clearer, the sky opening just enough to reveal thin strands of stars. Such clarity is rare here, and it is dangerous. For in this part of the Arctic, clearer skies often mean something else is watching. You notice how the escorts adjust their formation. They spread slightly, widening their protective arc. Their engines thrum with a deeper urgency, pushing them ahead and to the flanks. The officers do not say why. They do not need to. They know where they are. They know what these waters have claimed. On the merchant ships, whispers ripple quietly through the crew. They talk about past convoys that passed through this region, the ones that survived and the ones that didn't. These stories surface not out of fear, but out of recognition. Memory becomes a compass here, guiding the men through a place where statistics have weight. Many ships have sailed this path. Not all have reached the end. The calmness of the sea feels unsettling. Waves roll with an almost ceremonial grace. The horizon glimmers faintly in the dim light. The stillness stretches too long. You sense that every sailor feels it too, a stillness that does not comfort, but warns. In the radio rooms, operators catch fragments of distant transmissions, coded flashes, faint signals, partial warnings. Nothing full enough to act on, but enough to tighten the air. A message about aircraft to the west. Another about submarine shadows picked up far behind. Another about a ship attacked 2 days ago, not far from this very route. The men record these fragments with steady hands. They bring them to their captains. The captains read them, absorb them, and offer no commentary. Instead, they adjust their vessels' courses by slight degrees, small shifts meant to keep the convoy unpredictable. Above, the sky shows signs of changing again. A thin glow deepens along the northern edge. Clouds gather slowly, curling into shapes that swallow the stars. Wind shifts direction, hinting at something unseen approaching. On the escort vessels, the crew chiefs order their men to weapons stations. They prepare without hurry, but with unmistakable purpose. Men clear frost from barrels, check ammunition, and wipe down metal parts that the cold has turned stiff. Their breaths rise in pale plumes that swirl around their faces. Their fingers ache against frozen triggers. But they work with silent dedication, their bodies remembering drills rehearsed 100 times. The convoy tightens, reacting instinctively to the escort's preparations. Ships draw closer, creating a formation that appears tense and compact on the dark water. Every man aboard feels the shift. No one announces it. No one needs to. This part of the journey has a reputation, and reputations in the Arctic are rarely exaggerated. As the day fades, if one can call it day, the sky takes on a strange quality. The clouds move with unusual speed, shifting in layers that create patterns of shadow and light across the horizon. Some sailors glance upward, then quickly away, as though expecting movement where none should be. And then it comes, the first sign. Not an explosion, not a shot, not a sound. A lookout aboard an escort vessel stiffens. He squints into the thin band of sky above the southern horizon. He sees a shape, a speck at first, a speck moving too quickly, too straight, too purposefully to be anything natural. He signals the bridge without raising his voice. The officer on duty looks, narrows his eyes, and nods once. The alarm is not sounded yet. It is too early, too uncertain. But the tension sharpens. The lookout scans again. The shape vanishes into a cloud, then reappears, faint, small, but undeniably present. An aircraft. Far away, but closing. You feel the shift ripple through the escorts. Commands are given quickly but quietly. The ship's speed increases. The anti-aircraft crew snaps into position with the fastest reflexes they have shown in days. Men brace their bodies against the wind, leaning into frozen metal as they prepare for a threat that may or may not materialize. On the merchant ships, no announcement is made, but the officers step forward on the bridge. Sailors on deck straighten. The routine continues, but altered, charged with a quiet electricity. Men tighten gloves, adjust scarves, and glance skyward when they think no one is watching. The aircraft does not descend. It does not attack. It circles. Far enough to maintain safety. Close enough to report coordinates. The sailors know exactly what this means. They have not been attacked, but they have been found. This is how it begins on the Murmansk Run. Not with fire, with sighting, with reporting, with the enemy plotting from afar. The escort ship signals quietly to the convoy. Maintain formation. Stay alert. Prepare for contact. The men respond with a steady, heavy movement of sailors who understand what prepare truly means. Their bodies may tremble from cold, but their resolve holds steady. They knew this moment would come. The Arctic may have been their first enemy, but it was never their only one. The aircraft disappears into the cloud cover, leaving behind a silence more suffocating than before. The convoy sails on, knowing full well that somewhere, above or below, the next move is already being made. For in this region, survival comes at a price, and that price is almost always paid in lives. The moment the reconnaissance aircraft vanished into the cloud cover, the convoy entered a different kind of silence. Not the silence of calm seas or frozen nights, but the silence of men who know they have been marked. The sailors feel it settle over them like a second layer of frost. Every breath becomes tighter. Every footstep feels more deliberate. You can sense this shift in the air itself, as if the world around them is holding its breath. The sky darkens further, but not from weather alone. Shadows gather in places where none should exist. The clouds thicken, curling into heavier shapes that drift low and fast. The wind sharpens, cutting across the decks in narrow, slicing gusts. Somewhere above those clouds, beyond vision, something is moving with intent. The convoy continues forward, maintaining its strict formation. The escort vessels tighten their positions once more, moving with a smooth, grave discipline. Their engines thrum with a note that feels deeper than before, a sound shaped by anticipation. The men aboard them brace themselves against gun mounts and railings, their eyes fixed on the sky and sea with unwavering focus. The hunters are near now. Everyone can feel it. Night comes quickly, or perhaps it never left. The Arctic twilight gives way to darkness so complete that the ships appear like faint, moving islands of dim yellow light. The sea beneath them rolls silently, as if unwilling to reveal what moves beneath its surface. Then the first alarm sounds. Not a shout, not a horn. A sharp clang ringing through an escort's deck, the signal that sonar has picked up movement. Below the surface, a shape is moving fast. On the escort vessels, the reaction is instant and controlled. Orders are given in quick, precise sentences. Men rush to their stations with a practiced urgency born from countless drills. The engine room responds with increased power, sending vibrations through the hull. The ship veers in a tight arc, leaving behind the safe formation to hunt the threat below. You watch as depth-charge crews race across the slick deck. Their boots skid lightly on patches of ice, but their grips remain sure. They work with relentless speed, adjusting angles and preparing charges that will be released at exact intervals. Their breaths come in pale, rapid bursts that vanish into the darkness. Their faces show no panic, only focus. The merchant ships know what this means. A submarine is closing in. Men on deck freeze for a moment, not in fear, but in concentration. They watch the escort vessel peel away into the night. They hear the muted roar of its engines rising. They feel the shift in the sea as the rest of the convoy adjusts to fill the gap in formation. They grip railings and ropes a little tighter. Then the first depth charge drops. The sound is distant at first, a low, heavy splash swallowed quickly by the ocean. Moments pass. The sailors lean forward instinctively. A muffled explosion erupts beneath the surface. The sea shakes. The decks vibrate. A wave of cold water crashes against the hulls. Another depth charge follows. Then another, and another. Each explosion thunders through the water with a force that feels both distant and intimate. The men feel it in their bones. They listen for signs of success, debris rising, an oil slick, anything. But the darkness gives nothing back. The escort vessel continues its run, releasing depth charges in a pattern designed to trap and crush any submarine caught within its reach. The explosions echo across the convoy in long, rolling waves. Merchants hold their course, trusting the escorts to keep the underwater threat at bay. Radio men record the events, their hands shaking slightly as they write. Then, silence again. Not calm, not peace. A silence waiting for the next move. The convoy presses on, aware that the submarine may have evaded the attack. The men remain tense. No celebration comes. No sense of relief. Only watchfulness. The hunters beneath the sea are known for patience, and the sailors know that this encounter may not be over. For a time, the ocean remains quiet. The escorts resume their protective positions. The formation tightens again. The men return to their tasks, though with sharper eyes and quicker breaths. The threat lingers like a shadow beneath their feet. Hours pass. The cold deepens. The night grows heavier. Then the danger returns, but not from below. A lookout aboard a destroyer raises his hand sharply. He has seen movement in the sky. This time, the shape is clear. A low, fast object slicing through the clouds. A German torpedo bomber. The alarm bell rings across the convoy. The quiet ends. Gunners snap into action. Searchlights remain extinguished. They would reveal the convoy's position, but the anti-aircraft guns rise, trained on the sky with practiced precision. Men brace their feet against frozen metal. Hands grip cold triggers. Every sense sharpens. The bomber dives. Its silhouette flashes briefly against the faint horizon glow. Narrow wings, rounded nose, torpedo beneath its fuselage. A weapon meant to break ships apart with one strike. The destroyers fire first. Bright streaks tear through the sky, glowing tracers cutting arcs in the darkness. The bomber veers sharply, diving lower, skimming the surface of the waves. The torpedo releases with a splash that cuts through the roar of engines and wind. The sailors watch it drop. They follow its wake. A pale streak slicing through the black water. An escort vessel turns hard, the ship groaning under the sudden force. Men grip railings to keep from sliding. The vessel moves just fast enough. The torpedo passes alongside, missing by meters before vanishing into the depths. A moment of breath, short, sharp, and then the bomber climbs again. The merchant ships brace. Nobody moves. Nobody blinks. The escorts fire again, their guns thundering across the convoy with deafening force. Tracers cut brighter lines now. The bomber wavers, slightly, but enough, and retreats into the clouds. It disappears. But the danger remains. Torpedo bombers rarely attack alone. The convoy continues forward, shaken but intact. No ship lost. Not yet. But the sailors know this night is not finished. The hunters have seen them. And once seen, a convoy is never left alone for long. Ahead lies more darkness, more ocean, more patience from the enemy, more risk for every man aboard these ships. This passage will demand a cost, and every man knows the price may come at any moment. There is always a ship that carries the weight of the journey in a slightly different way than the rest. Not because it is weaker, not because it is slower, but because of where it sails. The last ship in the line. You watch it now, a merchant vessel coated in thick layers of frost, its lights dimmed to near invisibility, its bow rising and falling against the slow, heavy swell. Behind it stretches nothing but an endless expanse of Arctic darkness. No protection from the rear. No escort directly behind. Only the cold and whatever shadows move through it. Every convoy has a ship that closes the formation, and every sailor knows one truth about that position. It is the loneliest place on the Murmansk Run. All threats that follow the convoy must pass near this ship first. All dangers that strike from behind will find it before any other. If something happens here, response takes precious moments longer. And in these waters, moments can be the difference between survival and loss. You sense that the men aboard this vessel know this intimately. Their movements are sharper, more alert. Their eyes linger a little longer on the horizon behind them. Their breaths hang in the air longer, not just from cold, but from vigilance. Inside the wheelhouse, the officers stand rigidly, glancing at their instruments while also staring into the sweeping blackness behind the ship. They know they must match the speed of the formation, keep the same distance, maintain their course without deviation. Falling behind even a little would turn isolation into helplessness. But maintaining position is harder here. The waves at the rear of the convoy roll differently. They grow taller, more chaotic, disrupted by the wake of every ship ahead. And as the storm winds begin to shift once more, the swells push against the hull with renewed force. The men on deck brace themselves against railings thick with frost. Their gloves stick lightly to the frozen metal. Their cheeks burn. Their eyelashes carry tiny beads of ice that cling to each blink. The cold feels different back here, not harsher, but emptier, as if the world behind the ship is made of nothing but wind, water, and the threat of unseen things. Above, the sky moves in slow layers. Clouds pull apart and reform, revealing thin stripes of starlight that tremble against the vast black. The sailors look up occasionally, reading the weather, searching for movement. They do not expect the enemy to come from above at this hour, but expectation has little meaning here. The Arctic has its own logic. Inside the hull, the engine maintains its steady rhythm, a deep, thumping heartbeat that carries through the ship. The engineers work with quiet concentration, adjusting valves and watching gauges, knowing that a moment of hesitation down here could doom the men above. The engine must stay warm. It must stay strong. It must not falter. Then, a faint knock echoes along the hull. Not from within, from outside. A sound so subtle it could be mistaken for a drifting chunk of ice brushing against steel. The sailors do not react. Not yet. But the officers hear it. They know it was not ice. It was too soft, too steady, too rhythmic. One of the escort vessels sends a coded light signal forward. Possible contact astern. Maintain course. The sailors on the last ship in the line exchange glances. They do not speak. Words are unnecessary. They return to their duties with steps that feel slightly heavier. Minutes pass in silence. The knock does not return, but the tension does not fade. Then, another sound. This one deeper. A low, distant thud beneath the surface. The sonar aboard the nearest escort sings with sudden clarity. A shape below. Large. Moving fast. A submarine. You watch the escort vessel roar into action. Its engines surge. Its bow rises sharply. It breaks formation with precision and arcs toward the threat. On the last ship, the sailors brace themselves. They have trained for this. They have imagined this moment. But imagined danger is never the same as hearing it beneath your feet. The submarine is approaching the rear of the convoy, the weakest point in the formation. The escort must intercept quickly. In the darkness, depth charges are prepared. Men stand ready. Hands grip freezing metal. The last ship adjusts its course a fraction toward the center of the formation, trying to close the gap. The submarine moves closer. Its presence vibrates faintly through the hull, a sound felt more than heard. The escort dives into position. The deck shudders as the first depth charge drops. A splash. A heartbeat. Then a muffled explosion that erupts beneath the surface, sending water shooting into the air. The last ship rises with the wave. The sailors cling to railings. Ice shakes loose from overhead structures. Silence. Another charge. Another thunderous bloom of force. The sea trembles. But the chase is not over. The submarine shifts direction, accelerating beneath the last ship. The escort must reposition, fast. The sailors sense it before anyone confirms it. The submarine is directly beneath them, and for the first time tonight, fear flashes openly in a few eyes. Not panic, not surrender, but fear, the human kind, the kind that comes when one recognizes how thin the line is between survival and loss. The captain of the last ship issues a calm order. Steady. Hold course. The sailors obey. Because they must. Because turning now could scatter the formation. Because the escort needs them predictable. The submarine glides beneath the hull. A shadow passing through deeper darkness. A silent predator choosing its moment. Then, a sudden change. The submarine slows. Shifts direction. The escort drops another volley of depth charges. The water erupts. The shock waves tear through the sea. Boiling patches rise to the surface, glowing faintly in the ship's lights. A long, rising plume of bubbles follows. The sailors hold their breath. And then, nothing. Silence. Stillness. The shadow has vanished. The escort circles once more, sweeping the area as sonar pulses through the deep. The operators hear nothing now except their own breath in their headphones. The search continues, but the ocean gives nothing back. The submarine may be destroyed, or it may be waiting, motionless in the black. No one knows. The last ship in the line resumes its position. The convoy presses onward. But something has changed. The men have seen how close the sea brought loss, How fragile the formation truly is. How thin the margin between safety and tragedy. And you feel the weight of that knowledge settle across the convoy like frost. The night is not over. The journey is not done. And the Arctic still watches, silent and patient. The convoy sails on, but the encounter with the submarine changes the tone of the night in a way nothing else could. The men no longer move with the weary steadiness of routine. They move with the cautious steps of those who have just looked directly at the thin edge dividing them from fate. The cold has not lessened. The danger has not passed. But something inside each sailor has sharpened. You sense this immediately as you watch them on deck. Their eyes linger longer on the water behind the ship. Their ears strain for sounds beneath the surface. Their steps carry a quiet urgency that was not there before. It is as if every man aboard understands, on a deeper level now, how much depends on each moment of vigilance. The last ship in the line has returned to its place, but the officers know this position is more vulnerable than ever. A submarine that survives an attack often stalks from behind, waiting for exhaustion to loosen the convoy's discipline. They know U-boats linger at the edge of formations, like wolves testing the rear of a moving herd. So the last ship becomes a shield, a sentinel, a silent warning to whatever lurks in the black water behind it. Inside the bridge, the captain studies the horizon through frost-framed windows. He does not speak often. He simply watches, the sea, the sky, the faint silhouette of the escort ahead. He knows the convoy cannot afford hesitation. They must remain steady. They must remain predictable enough for the escorts to protect them, yet alert enough to react if the next threat strikes too close. The officers beside him stand with stiff shoulders, hands resting on cold instruments. Their eyes reflect the dim red glow of the lamps. They know they are nearing the final stretch of the journey, the part where hope begins to flicker, where the distant faint glow of the northern sky hints at land that lies beyond the frozen horizon. But hope, here, is something that must be carried carefully. Below deck, the sailors move with a new discipline. They check valves, secure equipment, and inspect lines with fresh urgency. Every sound is listened to twice. Every vibration is analyzed. Their bodies are tired to the point of numbness, but their senses are alert in a way only fear and responsibility can produce. In the mess hall, the atmosphere is different from any night before. The sailors sit closer, speaking in low tones that carry a mixture of exhaustion and quiet determination. They mention the depth charge blasts in passing, not to dwell on them, but to acknowledge the closeness of the threat. Some nod at each other in shared understanding. Others stare at their cups, absorbing warmth as if storing it for whatever comes next. On the escort vessels, the men work with sharpened edges. Sonar operators listen with a focus that borders on stillness. Gunners stand ready, hands poised, eyes narrowed. Lookouts pace the decks in slow, deliberate arcs, their silhouettes cutting through the cold. They all know the same truth. A submarine rarely gives up after one failed attack. The sea beneath them feels deeper now, darker, more watchful. But the convoy does not falter. Hours pass. The night grows heavier. The cold deepens, turning the air into something that feels almost solid. Then, a faint glow appears ahead. Not sunrise. Not the aurora. A pale band of grey stretching across the horizon, just visible through the shifting clouds. It is the first suggestion of land to the east, the direction of the Soviet coast, the destination the convoy has fought so hard to reach. The sailors notice it slowly, one by one, quietly. No cheers erupt. No voices shout in relief. But shoulders straighten, eyes lift, breaths steady. They are not there yet, but the world ahead looks different now. The Arctic, however, does not allow an easy end. As the convoy draws closer to land, the risk changes shape. The enemy presence increases. Aircraft patrol these regions more frequently. Submarines lurk along the approach routes. The cold remains merciless. The escorts communicate in quick, coded signals. Their formation compresses into a tight protective knot. The ships move as one, hugging the narrow corridor that leads them into the final leg of the passage. The water changes here, growing shallower, then deeper again, forming unpredictable currents shaped by underwater terrain the sailors cannot see. And then it happens. A sound. Soft. Muted. Barely perceptible. But unmistakable. A pressure wave beneath the hull. Not an explosion. A torpedo passing close. Too close. The last ship in the line shudders. Men grip railings. Eyes widen. Hearts pound. The submarine is back. Before fear can fully rise, the nearest escort vessel surges forward with sudden, violent speed. Lights flash. Engines roar. Depth charges spill into the sea in a rapid sequence of calculated drops. The ocean convulses with a series of muffled detonations, each one sending icy spray into the air. The sailors cough as the cold shock hits their faces. The sea boils. Foam surges. The convoy slows subtly, maintaining formation while allowing the escort space to hunt. Minutes pass. Long, agonizing minutes. Then, from beneath the surface, a dark slick begins to rise. Oil. Thick. Black. Spreading slowly across the water. A sign. A possibility. A grim confirmation that something has been hit. The escorts circle once, scanning for movement. Sonar pulses return nothing. No shadow. No shape. The submarine is gone. Whether destroyed or fled, none of the sailors can say. But the sea, for now, grows quiet. The convoy resumes its course. Strained. Watchful. But still moving. As the faint grey band ahead widens into a muted horizon, the sailors understand that they are nearing the end of the most dangerous stretch. The air remains freezing. The sea remains treacherous. But something subtle shifts inside them, the smallest thread of relief that their endurance has meant something. The last ship in the line continues forward, its hull battered, its decks heavy with ice, its men weary to their core. But still it moves. Still it holds. Still it follows the faint glow of land that waits somewhere beyond the cold. For this is how the Murmansk Run is survived. Not by outrunning danger, not by conquering fear, but by refusing to stop when the sea demands surrender. And the sailors aboard these frozen ships, tired, battered, and unbroken, carry their convoy into the final stretch of the journey. Epilogue. The silence that followed them home. You stand with them now, in the final hours of a journey carved through ice, darkness, and fear. The convoy has reached the coast at last, not in triumph, but in a quiet, exhausted drift toward safety that feels almost unreal. The sailors step onto the new shoreline with boots still stiff from frost, lungs still burning from cold, and minds still echoing with the rhythm of engines and storms. Land does not greet them loudly. It greets them gently. A thin morning light spreads across the docks in muted grey tones, soft enough to feel like mercy after the endless Arctic night. Snow drifts along the quayside in slow, delicate spirals. The ships behind them, coated in layers of ice, dented by storms, scarred by close calls, sit quietly in the water like creatures that have finally found a place to rest. The sailors move with a slowness that comes not from fatigue alone, but from disbelief. After so many days and nights of cold that gnawed at the edges of consciousness, the ground beneath their feet feels too still, too warm, too solid. Some men linger on the gangways, as if unsure whether it is safe to step forward. Others pause and stare at the mist rising from the sea, seeing ghosts of the journey still drifting above the waves. You sense a strange silence around them, not the silence of fear or tension, but the silence that comes after survival. It settles gently into their clothing and clings to their breath. It follows them into the narrow streets and wooden buildings of the small port, where warmth seeps slowly from stoves and lamps. It rests on their shoulders like a memory that will never fully thaw. They sit on benches, on crates, on steps made slick with frost. Some cradle hot cups between trembling hands, steam curling toward their faces as if trying to warm the places where the cold still lingers inside. They sip slowly, not out of caution, but because their bodies are relearning softness after too many days spent bracing against the Arctic's teeth. Their conversations remain minimal. A nod, a brief sentence, a name spoken quietly. The rest is carried in the spaces between words. You see men glance at one another with a recognition deeper than speech, the shared knowledge that they endured something vast, something heavy, something that could easily have taken them. They see in each other what they cannot yet articulate, the frostbite scar forming along a cheekbone, the trembling that hasn't quite left the hands, the distant look that enters the eyes when the wind brushes their skin. Inside the warehouses where supplies are unloaded, the atmosphere grows warmer. Light from low-hanging lamps paints soft circles on the floor. The sailors' shadows move slowly across the beams, bending and stretching like tired silhouettes learning to stand upright again. You notice how the men breathe differently here, deeper, steadier, no longer fighting the cold for each inhale. But even in this warmth, a quiet stillness clings to them. It settles on their old injuries. It lingers behind their eyes. It rests in their bones like a half-remembered dream. This silence is not emptiness. It is memory, not just of danger, but of endurance. It is the silence of men who have seen the sea rise against them, who have felt the Arctic's weight, who have walked through nights where the difference between living and vanishing came down to one steady breath in a world determined to steal it. It is the silence that follows a test survived through stubbornness more than strength, through unity more than skill. Some sailors rest their foreheads against the wooden walls, letting the warmth seep in slowly. Others stare out the windows toward the sea they just crossed. In their eyes you see gratitude, exhaustion, and something else, something harder to name. Not regret, not fear, something more like reverence for the part of themselves that refused to break. They know the Arctic has marked them. They also know they did not yield. And when they finally rise, to eat, to walk, to speak, they carry a new heaviness and a new clarity. They think of home differently now, of warmth differently, of time differently. The smallest comforts feel immense. The simplest sounds, footsteps on wood, wind against a roof, the clink of a metal cup, feel like reminders that life can be gentle again. Yet even as they begin to step back into the world, one truth follows them quietly. The Murmansk Run never truly ends for those who sailed it. It lingers in memory, in breath, in bones, in silence. A silence that will rise years later when winter winds return, when a ship's horn echoes across a harbor, when cold air brushes unexpectedly against the skin. A silence that carries the shape of frozen decks, the weight of heavy seas, the hum of engines pushing through darkness. A silence that reminds them that courage can be quiet and endurance can be colder than fear. And as you drift with them for these final moments, watching their breath soften, their shoulders lighten, their steps become steadier, you understand why the story endures. Not because of the danger alone, but because of the men who refused to surrender to it. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.